Three global superpowers collapsed in the last 500 years. Each followed an identical seven-stage pattern. Each believed they were the exception. The United States has now completed 5 of those 7 stages. That's not speculation. That's the documented sequence that destroyed Spain, bankrupted Britain, and dissolved the Soviet Union in 900 days. This isn't about politics or pessimism. It's not another doomsday prediction designed to scare you into clicking. This is pattern recognition, the same diagnostic framework historians use to autopsy dead empires. And when you see where America sits on that timeline, you'll understand why the math stopped caring about exceptionalism. December 26, 1991. Moscow. Picture a Soviet general named Viktor Petrov standing at his office window watching snowfall on Red Square. He's 54 years old. He commands a nuclear arsenal of 30,000 warheads, enough firepower to end civilization 12 times over. His monthly salary is 450 rubles, the equivalent of roughly $800 at the official exchange rate. Viktor doesn't know it yet, but this is the last day his country will exist. In exactly 6 hours, the Soviet flag will come down from the Kremlin for the final time. The superpower he dedicated his life to will simply cease to be. Not invaded, not conquered, not defeated in battle, just gone. Dissolved by economic collapse in 900 days. Viktor will receive his final paycheck in rubles that will lose 90% of their value within months. His pension, his savings, his entire life's work worthless. By 1993, he'll be selling his military medals at a street market to buy bread. Here's what haunts historians about that moment. Viktor's country had the largest nuclear arsenal on Earth, the biggest military, the most tanks, the most troops, and none of it mattered. Because empires don't die from weakness. They die from a pattern, a sequence so precise, so mathematical, that it has destroyed every superpower that triggered it. Spain, Britain, the Soviet Union. 3 global powers across 500 years. 3 complete collapses. 1 identical pattern. And the United States has already completed 5 of the 7 stages. Most people get this wrong. They think collapse looks like movies' invasions, explosions, dramatic last stands. That's not how superpowers die. The scene is quieter, more bureaucratic, a currency that stops being trusted, debts that can't be repaid, allies who start hedging, enemies who stop fearing. By the time anyone notices, it's already too late. Maria Gonzalez was 67 years old in 1640, the year Spain officially lost Portugal. She still remembered when Spanish silver could buy anything in the world. Her father had been a silversmith in Seville during the Golden Age, earning 200 reals monthly, enough for a large house servant's imported French wine. By the time Maria was a grandmother, that same 200 reales barely covered bread for a week. The coins looked identical. The face value was the same. But the silver inside had been replaced with copper. Her family's savings, accumulated across 3 generations, had been quietly stolen by the crown's printing press. She never understood what happened. She only knew that Spain used to be rich, and then it wasn't. Now imagine a different scene. London, 1947. A British Treasury official named Edward Hartley, age 41, is signing documents that will transfer control of India, the crown jewel of the empire, to independence. His hand trembles slightly. His father had administered colonial territories. His grandfather had helped build the Raj. 3 generations of empire ending with his signature on a piece of paper. Britain had won 2 world wars. They'd defeated Hitler. They'd saved Europe. And now they were surrendering the source of their wealth for 200 years, because winning those wars had bankrupted them beyond recovery. Edward's pension was fixed at £400 annually. In 1947, that was a respectable sum. By 1980, it would buy less than 1/3 of what it once did. The pound that once ruled global commerce had become a regional currency, losing 85% of its value against the dollar within his lifetime. Why does the same pattern keep repeating? Why do empires that control the world's money supply always end up destroying themselves with it? Here's the first open loop. I need you to hold on to every empire that achieved reserve currency status, made the same 7 decisions, in the same order, with the same results. Spain did it with silver. Britain did it with the pound. The Soviets did it with central planning. We're doing it with the dollar. And the sequence has never once been interrupted. Consider the contrast. In 1556, King Philip II of Spain inherited more wealth than any monarch in human history. 400 tons of silver arrived from the Americas annually. The Spanish real was accepted everywhere, the dollar of its age. Philip could have invested in Spanish industry, Spanish agriculture, Spanish innovation. Instead, he spent it on war. The Netherlands, France, the Ottomans, England, the Philippines. Wars on 4 continents simultaneously. By 1596, 40 years later, Spain had declared bankruptcy 4 times. The richest empire on earth couldn't pay its bills. And here's the paradox that should keep you awake. Philip bankrupted Spain, not despite having unlimited money, but because of it. When you can print or mine infinite currency, you stop producing anything real. Why grow food when you can import it? Why manufacture goods when you can buy them? Spain became a conduit. Wealth flowed through, but nothing stayed. The descendants of the conquistadors are now a tourist destination. There's a woman living in Michigan right now named Sandra Chen. She's 58 years old, a former auto worker from Flint. In 1985, she earned $28.50 an hour assembling transmissions for General Motors, enough for a house, 2 cars, college savings for her kids. Good, solid middle-class life. By 2024, adjusted for inflation, that same job should pay $78 an hour. The actual wage for comparable work today is $19. Sandra doesn't know about the 7-stage pattern. She doesn't know that stage 4 loss of productive capacity is what happened to her factory, her city, her entire way of life. She knows only that something broke sometime around the 1970s, and nobody in power seems interested in fixing it. She voted in every election, followed every rule, and still watched her world slowly disappear. Here's the second thing to hold on to. What happened to Sandra in Flint is connected to what happened to Victor in Moscow, connected to Edward in London, connected to Maria in Seville. It's not coincidence. It's not bad luck. It's the same mechanism playing out across centuries. The pattern has 7 stages: military overextension, currency debasement, debt spiral, loss of productive capacity, social decay, loss of reserve currency status, collapse. The United States has completed 5. We're not approaching the pattern. We're deep inside it. And what comes next has happened before every single time with the same result. The only question is whether we'll recognize it in time, or whether we'll learn what Victor learned on that December morning in Moscow, watching snowfall on the last day of an empire that thought it would last forever. To understand why empires collapse, you first need to understand what makes them powerful in the first place. It's not military strength. It's not territory. It's not even natural resources. It's something far more fundamental. It's the ability to control how the world defines money. Picture the global economy as a poker game. Everyone at the table uses chips. But one player, just one, gets to decide what those chips are worth. They print the chips. They distribute the chips. And when they run low, they simply print more. That player doesn't need to be the best at poker. They just need to control the chips. For 80 years, that player was Spain. For 100 years after that, it was Britain. For the last 80 years, it's been the United States. And here's the pattern that destroys them. All the moment you control the chips, you stop learning how to play the game. Let me show you exactly how this mechanism works. Stage 1 begins with military overextension. Every reserve currency nation faces the same temptation. When your money is accepted everywhere, You can afford wars everywhere. Spain fought on 4 continents. Britain defended 6. The Soviet Union tried to match American reach with a fraction of American GDP. The logic seems sound at first. More territory means more power. More power means more security. But military commitments compound. Each new base requires supply lines. Each alliance requires defense guarantees. Each war requires the next war to justify the last one. A merchant named Alessandro Ferrante understood this better than most generals. He was 52 years old in 1588, running a banking house in Genoa that lent money to the Spanish crown. Alessandro kept meticulous records. He knew exactly what Spain owed, and exactly what they could repay. When King Philip II demanded another 2 million ducats to rebuild the Spanish Armada after its disaster against England, Alessandro did the math. Spain's annual revenue was 9 million ducats. Their debt payments were already 7 million. Military spending took 5 million. Even a child could see the numbers didn't work. Alessandro lent the money anyway. Because when the most powerful empire on earth asks for a loan, you don't say no. You just charge higher interest and hope you get paid before the collapse. He didn't. The Ferrante banking house went bankrupt in 1607 when Spain defaulted for the 5th time. Stage 2 is currency debasement, and this is where most people get it wrong. They think debasement means printing too much money. That's not quite right. Debasement means breaking the promise your currency represents. Remember Maria from Part 1, the silversmith's daughter who watched Spanish coins become worthless. Here's what actually happened. A Spanish real was supposed to contain 3.4 grams of pure silver. That was the promise. That's what made merchants from London to Beijing accept it. But when Spain couldn't pay its bills, they had a choice: admit bankruptcy or quietly reduce the silver content. They chose reduction. By 1600, those same coins contained barely 0.5 grams of actual silver. Same face value, same stamp. But the promise was broken. Merchants noticed. It took years, sometimes decades, but trust erodes. And once trust is gone, it doesn't come back. What was the equivalent moment for the dollar August 15, 1971? President Nixon closed the gold window. Before that date, any foreign government could exchange $35 for 1 ounce of gold. That was the promise. After that date, a dollar was worth whatever America said it was worth. The mechanism was different. No copper mixed into coins, but the principle was identical. The promise was broken. Think about this in terms you might understand from your own life. Imagine you're running a small business. Your suppliers trust you, so they give you 30 days to pay your invoices. That's credit, a promise to pay later. Now imagine you start paying late. First 45 days, then 60, then 90. At some point, your suppliers stop extending credit. They demand cash up front. Your costs go up. Your flexibility disappears. Your competitive advantage evaporates. The same mechanism operates at the imperial level, just with more zeros. Stage 3 is the debt spiral, and it works like a trap. Once you're in it, every exit makes the trap tighter. Henry Wallace was a treasury analyst in London during the 1920s. He was 38 years old, brilliant with numbers, and increasingly terrified by what he saw. Britain had borrowed £9 billion to win World War I, roughly $600 billion in today's money. The interest alone consumed a quarter of government revenue. But here's what kept Henry awake. Britain had also made promises: welfare programs, military commitments, empire maintenance. Cutting any of them meant political suicide. So Britain did what Spain had done, what every declining empire does. They borrowed more to pay interest on previous borrowing. Henry wrote a memo in 1929 warning that the math was unsustainable. The memo was classified. Henry was quietly reassigned to a colonial posting in Singapore. When Japan invaded in 1942, he spent 3 years in a prisoner of war camp. He survived. His memo didn't change anything. Why do intelligent people keep making the same mistake? Because the debt spiral creates perverse incentives. If you're a politician, cutting spending loses votes today. Collapse happens tomorrow, probably after you've left office. The rational choice is to borrow and hope. Every emperor, prime minister, and president has made the same calculation. Here's an open loop for you. Stage 4 is loss of productive capacity. It's the most dangerous stage because it's invisible. The factories close slowly. The skills disappear gradually. The dependency on imports creeps up year by year. Nobody notices until it's irreversible. And there's something happening right now, something that started in the 1970s that accelerated this stage for America faster than any empire before it. But before I explain, that I need to show you the contrarian truth that ties all of this together. Reserve currency status doesn't make you rich. It makes you addicted. When the world needs your currency, they send you real goods, cars, electronics, food, clothing, and you send them paper. That sounds like a great deal. But here's what happens over time. Your workers can't compete with cheap imports, so factories close. Your corporations discover it's cheaper to manufacture overseas, so they offshore. Your economy shifts from making things to financing things, from producing to consuming. The paper flows out, the goods flow in. And slowly, invisibly, you forget how to build. Sandra Chen, the auto worker from Michigan, lived this transition. In 1985, her factory employed 4,000 workers making transmissions. By 2005, it employed 800. By 2015, it was closed. The transmission plant moved to Mexico, then China, then Vietnam. Each move followed the same logic: cheaper labor, higher profits, better returns for shareholders. No single decision seemed catastrophic. But the cumulative effect was stage 4. Spain experienced the identical pattern 400 years earlier. When you can import French wine and Italian silk and Dutch ships, why bother producing your own? The Spanish nobility considered work beneath them. Within 2 generations, Spain manufactured almost nothing. They were rich in silver, but poor in capacity. The one-liner that captures this reserve currency status is a loan from the future that comes due all at once. So when does the loan come due? How do you know when stage 4 tips into stage 5? There's a signal. It's the same every time. And it appeared in the United States in 2008. Everything I've shown you so far was the mechanism, the invisible machinery that grinds beneath every dying empire. What happened next was the acceleration, the moment the machinery stopped being invisible. The moment people started to notice the floor was crumbling beneath their feet. Let me write this with the documentary tone, American English flowing narrative, without bullet points or bold headers. September 15, 2008. New York City. Picture the trading floor at Lehman Brothers at 6 a.m. The fluorescent lights are on, but nobody's trading. They're packing boxes. 25,000 employees learning simultaneously that their company, 158 years old survivor of the Civil War, 2 world wars, the Great Depression, would cease to exist by midnight. Security guards at the exits. Crying in the bathrooms. Grown men carrying cardboard boxes past the logo they'd built careers under. Richard Fuld, the CEO, was worth $500 million on paper. By the end of the week, his stock was worthless. But here's the twist. Most people miss. Richard kept his houses, his art collection, his cash. The collapse destroyed his employees' 401ks, their stock options, their severance. Richard walked away bruised but wealthy. The people who created the crisis were not the people who paid for it. That's not a political statement. That's the pattern. And it's been true for every empire at stage 5. Remember Alessandro Ferrante, the Genoese banker who lent to Spain knowing the math didn't work. He went bankrupt when Spain defaulted. But the Spanish nobles who'd borrowed the money kept their estates. The mechanism protects those closest to the money creation, while the collapse radiates outward to everyone else. 2008 was America's first visible crack. The moment the floor stopped feeling solid. But here's what most people get wrong about the financial crisis: they think it ended. They think the bailouts fixed it. They think we recovered. We didn't recover. We accelerated. In 2007, total U.S. federal debt was $9 trillion. By 2010, it was $14 trillion. By 2024, it's $36 trillion. The bailouts didn't solve the debt problem. They institutionalized it. They proved that when the system breaks, the solution is always more debt, more printing, more promises that can't be kept. The Spanish crown declared bankruptcy 4 times in 40 years. Each time they promised reforms. Each time they went right back to borrowing. We followed the identical playbook, just with better public relations. Janet Yellen was 62 years old in 2008, serving as president of the San Francisco Federal Reserve. She watched the crisis unfold in real time, saw the internal data nobody else could see. In meeting after meeting, she advocated for aggressive intervention. Print money. Buy toxic assets. Save the banks. The logic seemed sound: let the system collapse, and millions of ordinary people lose everything. But here's the open loop. I need you to hold. The intervention had a cost. Not paid in 2008. Not paid in 2010. Not even fully paid today. Every dollar printed to save the banks diluted every dollar already in circulation. The cost was transferred silently, invisibly, to everyone holding cash, everyone on a fixed income, everyone whose wages didn't keep pace with asset inflation. The banks were saved. The bill was mailed to the future. We're living in that future now. Michael Torres was 34 years old in 2008, a construction worker in Phoenix, Arizona. He'd bought a house in 2006 for $280,000, his first home, the culmination of 12 years of saving. When the market crashed, his house was worth $95,000. He owed $260,000. Michael did everything right, paid his bills on time, never missed a mortgage payment. But the bank that held his loan received $45 billion in bailout funds and used part of it to foreclose on his house anyway. They could afford to wait for the market to recover. Michael couldn't. By 2010, Michael was living in his sister's basement. His credit destroyed, his savings gone. The house he'd lost was purchased at auction by an investment fund for $87,000. That same fund received favorable Federal Reserve lending rates as part of the recovery program. By 2020, the house was worth $410,000. Who do you think lives there now? Not Michael. Here's the first micro hook. What happened to Michael wasn't an accident. It wasn't a policy failure. It was the policy working exactly as designed. And the same mechanism, the same wealth transfer from the edges to the center, has operated in every empire at stage 5. The question isn't whether it's happening. The question is why we pretend it isn't. The public story of 2008 goes like this. Reckless banks made bad bets. The government stepped in to prevent catastrophe. Tough regulations were passed to make sure it never happened again. That's the textbook version. The reality looks different. Between 2008 and 2014, the Federal Reserve created $4.5 trillion through quantitative easing. Picture that number. If you stacked $100 bills, $4.5 trillion would reach past the International Space Station. That money didn't go to roads or schools or manufacturing. It went to financial assets, stocks, bonds, real estate. The explicit goal was to inflate asset prices, making wealthy people feel wealthier so they'd spend more. It worked. The stock market tripled, housing prices recovered, and then exceeded their pre-crisis peaks. But wages grew 27% over the same period. If you owned assets, you got rich. If you worked for wages, you fell behind. Every single year, for 15 years straight. Remember Sandra Chen from Part 1, the auto worker from Flint, whose $28.50 hourly wage should be $78 today, but is actually $19. This is the mechanism that did it. Not outsourcing alone, not automation alone. The deliberate inflation of assets while wages stagnated. Sandra didn't lose a job. She lost a share of the economy. And it was taken so gradually, so invisibly, that she never knew who to blame. Pause this video for 10 seconds. Consider what you just heard. Between 2008 and 2024, the Federal Reserve printed over $8 trillion. Asset owners, the wealthiest 10%, captured 87% of the gains. Wage earners, the remaining 90%, saw their purchasing power decline in real terms. That's not a recession. That's not a policy mistake. That's a wealth transfer by design, executed in plain sight, while everyone argued about politics. Now continue watching, because what happened next made it permanent. Here's the second twist that changes everything. The 2008 crisis wasn't the disease. It was the symptom. The disease started in 1971. When Nixon closed the gold window, he didn't just change monetary policy. He changed the fundamental relationship between work and wealth. Before 1971, productivity gains flowed to workers. After 1971, productivity gains flowed to asset holders. The charts are undeniable. From 1948 to 1971, worker productivity and worker compensation rose together nearly 1-to-1. After 1971, productivity kept climbing. Compensation flatlined. That's 53 years of divergence. 53 years of the gap widening. 53 years of the promise breaking. Now here's the rage moment. I need you to see this clearly. Picture two photographs side by side. On the left, Jamie Dimon, CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, at the 2023 Davos conference. Tan, relaxed, wearing a $4,000 suit, discussing inclusive capitalism with world leaders. His net worth, $2 billion. His bank received $25 billion in bailout funds in 2008. It was repaid, yes, but at interest rates of nearly zero, while the bank charged customers 24% on credit cards. That spread free money from the government expensive money to citizens generated billions in profits. On the right picture, Maria Gonzalez different. Maria same pattern, age 58, a hotel housekeeper in Las Vegas. She worked through the entire pandemic cleaning rooms while executives worked from home. Her 401k was in a target date fund that lost 30% in 2008 and took until 2013 to recover. Jamie's J.P. Morgan stock recovered in 18 months. Maria makes $16.50 an hour. After 30 years of work, her retirement savings total $43,000. Jamie's compensation in 2023 alone was $36 million. Maria cleaned rooms in a J.P. Morgan financed hotel. She earned in a year what Jamie earned in 14 hours. Write that down. Remember it the next time someone talks about how we all recovered together from the financial crisis. The recovery was real. It just wasn't for everyone. Second micro hook. Everything I've described so far, the bailouts, the printing, the wealth transfer, those were stages 3 and 4 accelerating. The debt spiral deepening. The productive capacity hollowing out. But stage 5 is different. Stage 5 is when the society itself starts to fragment. When trust collapses. When people stop believing the system works for them. And there's a date when stage 5 became undeniable. Here's the open loop. Something happened in 2020 that compressed decades of decline into months. It wasn't the pandemic itself, it was the response. And it set up the final dominoes for stages 6 and 7. Viktor Petrov, the Soviet general from Part 1, the man who watched his superpower dissolve while holding 30,000 nuclear warheads, once told a journalist, something haunting. We knew for years it was failing. We saw the lines for bread. We saw the factories producing junk. But we believed the propaganda anyway, because the alternative was too frightening to accept. The United States isn't the Soviet Union. The mechanisms are different. The ideology is different. But the pattern of denial is identical. Every empire at stage 5 tells itself the same story. We're different, we're exceptional, the rules don't apply to us. The rules always apply. The one-liner that captures this moment. The collapse doesn't announce itself. It just stops pretending to be stable. Everything I've shown you so far was the wound. The bleeding has been slow, invisible, spread across decades. What happened next was the hemorrhage. The moment the slow decline became a rapid unraveling, and it started with a decision made in March 2020 that printed more money in 3 months than the previous century combined. I'll craft a narrative that feels like a slow, mournful dissection of systemic decline, where each personal story becomes a microcosm of broader national tragedy. The tone will be clinical, yet deeply emotional, like a pathologist performing an autopsy on a once great civilization. Empires don't collapse like buildings. They collapse like marriages. Slowly. Invisibly. 1,000 small betrayals that only make sense in retrospect. The Soviet Union didn't die on December 26, 1991. It had been dying for 20 years before that. The breadlines of the 1980s were symptoms, not causes. The cause was a decision made in 1965 to prioritize military spending over consumer goods. 26 years of slow decay before the final implosion. Britain's empire didn't end in 1947, when India gained independence. It had been ending since 1914, when they chose to fight a war they couldn't afford. 33 years of gradual retreat before the crown jewel was surrendered. Spain's golden age didn't end when the silver mines depleted. It ended when they stopped producing anything worth buying. The mines just exposed the hollowness that had been growing for decades. The pattern is always the same. The death is slow, the recognition is sudden, and by the time anyone admits what's happening, it's already too late to reverse. So what does slow death look like? Let me show you 2 trajectories. Same starting point. Different outcomes. Separated only by which side of the mechanism they stood on. Thomas Hargrove was 28 years old in 1985, a mechanical engineer in Detroit. He'd graduated from Michigan State, landed a job at General Motors, and bought a modest house in Warren for $67,000. His starting salary was $32,000 per year. Solid middle class. The American dream exactly as promised. By 1995, Thomas was earning $58,000. His house was worth $89,000. He had $45,000 in his 401k. The trajectory was working. Then the curve bent. By 2005, Thomas was 48. His salary had risen to $74,000, but adjusted for inflation, he was earning less than in 1995. His manufacturing division was restructured. He took a 15% pay cut to avoid layoff. By 2015, at 58, Thomas was earning $71,000. His house was worth $95,000. His 401k had recovered from the 2008 crash, sitting at $180,000. He planned to retire at 65, with about $250,000 saved. In 2023, Thomas turned 66. His 401k holds $210,000 less than he projected, thanks to 2022's market decline. His house is worth $140,000. His monthly Social Security check is $100. After 38 years of engineering work, Thomas lives on $4,300 per month. He cannot afford to get sick. He cannot afford to help his grandchildren with college. He did everything right and ended up hoping he dies before the money runs out. Now picture Richard Chen, same age, same year. Richard was 28 in 1985, a mechanical engineer in San Jose. Same degree, same skill set, same work ethic. But Richard's company made computer chips, not cars. By 1995, Richard had stock options worth $200,000. By 2005, he'd cashed out twice during tech booms, accumulating $1.2 million. By 2015, his net worth was $4.8 million. Today, at 66, Richard has $11 million in assets. He retired at 58. His grandchildren's college is fully funded. Same skills, same work ethic, different industries, different proximity to the money creation. Thomas made things that moved. Richard made things that processed the moving of money. The economy rewarded one and punished the other. This wasn't luck. It was mechanism. But the divergence in wages was just the beginning. The divergence in wealth would take decades to measure. Visualize a graph with two lines starting from the same point in 1971. One line represents asset prices, stocks, bonds, real estate. The other represents median wages. For the first few years, they track together. Then slowly they begin to separate. By 1985, the gap is noticeable. By 2000, it's a canyon. By 2024, they're in different universes. Assets have increased 200% since 1971. Wages have increased 300%. If you owned, you multiplied. If you worked, you crawled. Here's the contrarian twist that changes the story. This wasn't a failure of capitalism. This was capitalism optimized for the wrong metric. The system delivered exactly what it was designed to deliver: maximum returns to capital, minimum returns to labor. The question is, who designed it that way, and whether it can be redesigned before Stage 6. Remember Jamie Dimon and Maria the housekeeper from Part 3. Their divergence wasn't personal. It was structural. Jamie sat at the center of the money creation. Maria sat at the edge. The further from the center, the more the debasement costs you. The closer to the center, the more it benefits you. This is the Cantillon effect, named after an 18th century economist who noticed that newly created money doesn't spread evenly. It flows first to those closest to its creation, and by the time it reaches everyone else, prices have already risen. The Federal Reserve isn't evil. The bankers aren't villains in a movie. They're rational actors responding to incentives within a system designed 110 years ago. The problem isn't the people. The problem is the pattern. Let me show you what happens when a country resists the pattern. Klaus Richter was 28 years old in 1985, a mechanical engineer in Stuttgart, Germany. Same age, same profession as Thomas and Richard. Klaus worked for Bosch making automotive components. His starting salary was equivalent to $28,000, slightly less than Thomas in Detroit. By 2024, Klaus is 67. He retired last year with a pension that pays 70% of his final salary for life. His health care is covered completely. He owns his apartment outright. His net worth is approximately $800,000, modest by American standards, but representing genuine security. Same work, same skills, different system. Germany made different choices. They maintained manufacturing capacity instead of offshoring it. They invested in vocational training instead of assuming everyone needed a college degree. They kept workers on corporate boards, giving labor a voice in capital decisions. They resisted the full financialization that consumed the American economy. The result, German wages kept pace with productivity. German manufacturing remained globally competitive. German workers retired with dignity instead of anxiety. This isn't about Germany being morally superior. It's about pattern resistance. They saw what happened to Britain after deindustrialization. They chose differently, and the trajectories diverged. So why didn't America make the same choice? Here's the open loop. There was a moment in the early 1980s when the path forked, a specific set of decisions that locked in the pattern we're living now. Those decisions weren't accidents. They were policies advocated by specific people for specific reasons. And they won. Now visualize a map of the world in 1990 with colors representing manufacturing capacity. The United States and Western Europe are bright red industrial powerhouses. China is pale pink, minimal capacity. 30 years later, the colors have reversed. China is blazing red. America has faded to orange. The factories didn't disappear. They moved. And they took the middle class with them. Here's the second trajectory. Linda Patterson was 35 in 1995, a textile worker in North Carolina. She operated looms at a mill that had employed her family for 3 generations. Her salary was $24,000 per year. By 2000, the mill closed. NAFTA made Mexican labor cheaper. By 2005, Linda was working at Walmart for 9.50 sounds an hour. By 2010, she'd developed diabetes common among former manufacturing workers whose sedentary retail jobs replaced physical factory work. By 2024, Linda is 64. She earns $14.50 an hour as a cashier. Her diabetes medication costs $400 per month with insurance. She will never retire. She will work until she physically cannot. Then she will depend on her children who are fighting their own battles in the same economy. Wei Zhong was 35 in 1995, a textile worker in Guangzhou, China. She operated looms at a mill that had just opened with foreign investment. Her salary was equivalent to $1,200 per year, a 20th of Linda's. By 2000, Wei was a floor supervisor. By 2005, she managed the entire production line. By 2010, she'd saved enough to open a small factory of her own, making accessories for European brands. By 2024, Wei is 64. Her factory employs 200 workers. Her net worth is approximately $3 million. Her daughter graduated from Stanford. Same work, same starting position, different trajectories. Linda lost her future to a trade deal. Wei gained hers from the same deal. The jobs didn't disappear. They migrated. And nobody asked Linda if she approved. The one-liner that captures this moment: globalization created more winners than losers, but the losers were concentrated, visible, and angry, and nobody had a plan for them. Here's the question that should haunt policymakers. If you knew in 1995 that these deals would hollow out the American working class, would you still sign them? And if the answer is yes, what did you expect would happen to democracy when half the country felt abandoned? Stage 5 social decay isn't a mystery. It's the predictable result of Stage 4. When people lose economic security, they lose faith in institutions. When they lose faith in institutions, they embrace alternatives. The populist movements, the conspiracy theories, the tribalism, the rage, these aren't aberrations. They're symptoms. The pattern predicts them. Now here's the pattern reveal that ties everything together. Argentina debased its currency in the 1980s. By 1990, inflation reached 20,000%. The middle class was destroyed in a decade. Venezuela debased its currency in the 2010s. By 2019, inflation reached 1,000%. The middle class fled or starved. Zimbabwe debased its currency in the 2000s. By 2008, they printed $100 trillion bills that couldn't buy bread. Turkey is debasing its currency now. The lira has lost 80% of its value since 2018. The middle class is collapsing in real time. Japan has been debasing since the 1990s. Their stagnation is gentler, but their national debt is 260% of GDP, the highest in the developed world. 5 countries, 5 currencies, 5 implementations of the same mechanism. Different speeds, different contexts, same direction. Wealth transfers from labor to capital. Purchasing power stripped from wages. The middle class squeezed until it disappears. If the same mechanism produces the same results in 5 different countries over 40 years, is it a bug or a feature? The one-liner that captures the scale. The pattern doesn't care about ideology. Left or right, democratic or authoritarian, the math works the same way. Debase the currency, hollow, the production harvest, the middle class. Viktor Petrov, remember him, the Soviet general from Part 1, understood this at the end. He told the journalist, "We thought communism failed. We didn't realize the failure was mathematical, not ideological. You cannot print prosperity. You can only redistribute it. And eventually, there's nothing left to redistribute." The Soviet Union reached Stage 7 in 900 days. Argentina reached Stage 7 in 15 years. Britain managed a controlled descent over 50 years. The speed varies. The destination doesn't. And this brings us to the present. Because the system designed in 1913 accelerated in 1971, turbocharged in 2008, and weaponized in 2020, is still operating today. The same mechanism, the same direction, the same predictable endpoint. The only question is whether Stage 6 loss of reserve currency status has already begun. I'll weave their stories into the complex tapestry of systemic collapse, showing how individual experiences reflect broader patterns of institutional breakdown and human adaptation. Let me take you back one final time to December 26, 1991. Moscow. Viktor Petrov standing at his window, watching snow fall on Red Square. Viktor processed the final paperwork that afternoon, signed off on the transfer protocols for Nuclear Command Authority, closed his office for the last time, walked past the guards, who no longer knew which country they served. He went home to his wife and told her the empire was finished. He had no idea. He didn't know that his daughter Natasha, 24 years old that day, would immigrate to Chicago in 1994 and become an accountant. He didn't know that his grandson, born in 2001, American citizen named Michael, after no one in particular would grow up without any memory of Soviet power. He didn't know that in 2024, Michael Petrov would be 23 years old, working 2 jobs in Chicago, unable to afford a studio apartment, watching his purchasing power erode month by month, living through Stage 5 of the same pattern that destroyed his grandfather's country. Viktor saw the Soviet collapse as an ending. He didn't realize it was also a preview. Picture 2 photographs side by side. Viktor Petrov in 1991, 54 years old, watching his superpower dissolve his life savings, becoming worthless, his pension evaporating. Michael Petrov in 2025, 24 years old, college-educated, working full-time, unable to afford what his grandfather took for granted at the same age, housing, healthcare, the reasonable expectation that hard work leads somewhere. Different systems, different ideologies, same pattern, same Stage 5, same hollowing of the middle. Sandra Chen, the auto worker from Flint. We met in part 1, is 59 now. Her factory closed 8 years ago. She works part-time at a logistics warehouse sorting packages for $15.75 an hour. Her retirement savings total $67,000. She'll receive about $1,400 per month in Social Security starting at $67,000. She needs $3,200 per month just to maintain her current modest lifestyle. Sandra did the math. She'll work until she can't. Then she'll depend on her children, who are fighting the same battle with fewer resources. Here's the question nobody in power wants to answer if the pattern is visible, documented, and repeating: why does no one stop it? Here is the contrarian point that challenges even this narrative. There may be no conspiracy, no shadowy group pulling strings, no villains meeting in secret rooms. The pattern doesn't require evil intent. It only requires rational actors pursuing short-term incentives consistently over decades. Politicians who need votes this cycle. Executives who need quarterly earnings. Central bankers who need to prevent the next crisis. Each decision makes sense in isolation. Together they form a pattern that destroys empires. The Spanish crown wasn't evil. They were just trying to fund their wars and maintain their power. The British Treasury wasn't malicious. They were just trying to win wars and preserve their empire. The Soviet Politburo wasn't uniquely corrupt. They were just trying to maintain control while the math collapsed beneath them. The Federal Reserve isn't secretly plotting against workers. They're just using the only tools they have, tools designed 110 years ago for a different economy. The system doesn't require villains, it only requires inertia. And inertia is the hardest force in the universe to overcome. Now visualize a timeline stretching from 1971 to 2025. Mark the key inflection points. The closing of the gold window, the financialization of the 1980s, the offshoring of the 1990s, the housing bubble of the 2000s, the quantitative easing of the 2010s, the pandemic printing of the 2020s. Each point accelerated the pattern. Each point transferred wealth upward. Each point was defended by experts as necessary temporary and consequence-free. 54 years of temporary measures. 54 years of consequences deferred. In 2024, the BRICS nations held their summit and discussed alternatives to the dollar. Central banks worldwide bought more gold than any year since 1967. Saudi Arabia began accepting yuan for oil. Russia and China settled trade in their own currencies. The signals of Stage 6 loss of reserve currency status are appearing. Not conclusive, not irreversible, but visible for those who know the pattern. What does Stage 6 look like when it arrives? Remember Edward Hartley from Part 1, the British Treasury official who signed away India in 1947. His grandchildren grew up in a Britain that pretended nothing had changed. Same ceremonies, same institutions, same rhetoric about greatness. But the pound kept falling. The empire kept shrinking. And by the time Edward's great-grandchildren were adults, they couldn't afford housing in London without family wealth. The decline was managed. It was gentler than Spain's, but it was absolute. The one-liner that captures the British lesson, managed decline is still decline. The empire becomes a museum. The currency becomes a memory. When you hear about new trade agreements, ask who benefits from the capital flows. When you hear about monetary policy decisions, ask who receives the new money first. When you hear about economic recovery, ask recovery for whom. These aren't predictions. They're diagnostic questions. Understanding this history won't tell you what to buy or sell. That's not the point. The point is to see the pattern so that when the next crisis arrives, when the next intervention is announced, when the next expert promises that this time is different, you'll recognize the mechanism. Thomas Hargrove, the Detroit engineer from Part 4, retired last month. Quietly. No party, just cleaned out his desk after 38 years and drove home. His 401k holds $215,000. He owns his house. He'll probably be okay if nothing goes wrong. If healthcare costs don't spike. If inflation stays moderate. If the market doesn't crash before he draws down. That's the American retirement now. Not security. Contingency. A prayer that nothing goes wrong for 30 years. Thomas's grandson, 19 years old, is studying engineering at Michigan State. Same school Thomas attended. Same degree. Same dream. But the path that worked for Thomas in 1985, graduate, get a good job, buy a house, save for retirement. End up okay. That path is closed now. The math doesn't work anymore. The median engineering salary can't purchase the median house. The average savings rate can't fund the average retirement. The equation broke somewhere along the way. The grandson doesn't know this yet. He's studying, working hard, believing in the promise, just like Thomas did, just like Victor did, just like Maria the silversmith's daughter did in 1640 Spain. The pattern doesn't announce itself to those living through it. It only becomes clear in retrospect. The file that closed on December 26, 1991, the one Victor signed before walking home for the last time, didn't mention what would happen to his savings. Didn't mention that his grandson would grow up American and face the same pressures. Didn't mention them the mechanism which destroyed Soviet prosperity had cousins in every economic system, working the same math, producing the same results. The file recorded an ending. It didn't record that endings are also beginnings. The mechanism that transferred wealth from the Soviet middle class to the connected few, that mechanism is still operating. In Russia, in America, in China, in Europe. Different ideologies, different justifications, same direction. The pattern continues until something interrupts it. Spain had 80 years from peak to collapse. Britain had 50. The Soviet Union had 20. The acceleration is real. The timeline is compressing. And the United States entered Stage 5 sometime in the last decade. 3 empires fell following this pattern. The 4th is deep inside it. What makes you certain we're the exception? The answers aren't hiding in the future. They're written in the past, waiting for someone to read them before it's too late.